Floods, earthquakes, cyclones, droughts. We call them natural disasters, as if destruction is an unavoidable mood of the planet, as if damage simply falls from the sky, unshaped by human choice or habit. Nature certainly moves with power. Rivers overflow, plates shift, winds gather force, rains fail. These are hazards, ancient, recurring, indifferent to our calendars, economies, or expectations. They exist whether we watch them or not. Yet, when we speak of disaster, we are rarely describing nature alone. We are describing homes swept away, lives interrupted, futures narrowed. We are describing loss, suffering, and vulnerability, layered on top of natural events. Two places can face the same storm. One recovers quietly. Another collapses into crisis. The wind was identical. The rain was equal. Something else made the difference, something beyond clouds and currents. Disaster, then, is not a single moment. It is a meeting point where natural hazards encounter human settlement, human decisions, human inequalities, and human preparation or the absence of it. Loss is shaped long before the waters rise. It is shaped by where people live, what they build, what they can afford, and what risks they are quietly asked to carry every day. So tonight, as we listen to stories of calamity, we begin with a simple shift in language. Nature may create hazards, but the scale of loss is something society slowly, often unknowingly designs. When we say disaster, we often imagine the event itself, the shaking ground, the rushing water, the violent wind. But in careful listening, disaster usually means something wider, slower, and more deeply human. In everyday use, a disaster is when normal life breaks, when routines fail, support systems strain, and familiar spaces no longer offer safety or certainty. It is less about spectacle, more about disruption. Many people studying disasters say something similar. One simple line goes, "A disaster is a serious disruption of the functioning of a community." Quiet words, but they point far beyond the moment of impact. Disruption means schools that cannot open, markets that fall silent, hospitals overwhelmed, families separated. It is the long echo after the event when recovery is uneven and some voices fade faster than others. A disaster is also relational. It appears where people depend on shared systems, shared spaces, shared trust, and where those connections are fragile or stretched thin even before danger arrives. This is why the same hazard feels different to different people. For some, it is an interruption. For others, it is a breaking point where loss compounds and options quietly disappear. Disasters expose what usually stays hidden. They reveal who had buffers, who lived on margins, and who was already one shock away from collapse, long before the ground shook or the river rose. They also stretch time. A disaster does not begin when news alerts flash, nor does it end when the cameras leave. For many, it unfolds slowly, in months of repair and waiting. So when we speak of disaster here, we are not naming nature's anger, but society's stress test. Moments when ordinary life is interrupted, and the shape of that interruption tells us who we really are. An earthquake under an empty desert is just movement. A flood through uninhabited plains is water following gravity. A storm over open sea is weather doing what it has always done. These are hazards. They carry energy and uncertainty, but by themselves they are not disasters. Nothing is lost if nothing is exposed to them. A disaster begins when hazards meet people, when homes stand in the river's path, when livelihoods depend on fragile ground, when a shaking earth meets crowded rooms and narrow exits. Think of a leaking roof. Rain is ordinary. But if the roof is weak, the same rain ruins furniture, papers, sleep. The problem is not the rain alone. Or imagine a power cut. For some, it is an inconvenience. For others, it means spoiled food, lost wages, unsafe nights. The event is identical, the impact is not. Hazards become disasters through exposure, through where we build, how we connect, what we depend on daily, and how much room we have to absorb a sudden shock. Infrastructure matters quietly here. Roads, houses, water lines, electricity. When they are strong, hazards pass through life like disturbances. When they are fragile, disruption multiplies fast. Livelihoods matter too. A flood is different for someone with savings than for someone paid daily. The water level may be the same, but the recovery is not. So disasters are not sudden accidents. They are the result of hazards colliding with human arrangements, our settlements, our work, our dependencies, turning natural events into social crises. India is no stranger to disasters. Cyclones return to the coast, floods revisit river plains, earthquakes shake familiar fault lines. These events are not surprises, they are recurring chapters in a long national memory. Droughts arrive quietly without spectacle. Fields crack, wells retreat, choices narrow that eye. They come again and again, testing patience, livelihoods, and the ability to endure slow-moving stress rather than sudden shock. Heat waves now feel less like anomalies. Each summer seems harsher, longer, heavier on the body. What once felt extreme increasingly feels expected, woven into seasonal life and daily adjustment. Earthquakes remind us of unseen boundaries below. They appear without warning, disappear quickly, and leave behind questions about safety, construction, and how much risk we have learned to live with. Floods, too, repeat themselves. Rivers spill into towns they have visited before. Streets turn into channels remembered from earlier years, carrying the sense that this has happened and will happen again. Cyclones trace familiar paths along the coast. Names change, winds differ, but the rhythm remains. Evacuation, return, repair, an almost rehearsed cycle shaped by experience rather than novelty. Then came the pandemic. Not from earth or water, but still a disaster, stretching systems, isolating families, and reminding us that disruption does not always arrive with visible force. Together, these experiences form a pattern. Disasters in India are rarely rare. They recur, overlap, and accumulate, becoming part of everyday planning rather than distant, once-in-a-generation events. The question, then, is not whether disasters will happen. It is how a society that has seen them so often chooses to live with that knowledge year after year, season after season. Disasters do not affect everyone equally. They follow existing lines in society, settling where life is already uncertain, where safety is conditional, and where recovery demands resources that are unevenly distributed. Poverty shapes exposure first. Those with fewer choices often live closer to rivers, slopes, heat, or unstable ground, not because of preference, but because safer spaces quietly cost more. Housing quality matters in simple ways. A strong roof, A raised floor, a solid wall can turn a hazard into discomfort. Their absence can turn this same event into displacement or loss. Occupation also plays a role. Daily wage workers, farmers, street vendors cannot pause income when danger arrives. For them, staying safe and staying employed often pull in opposite directions. Many reports have noted this pattern. Loss concentrates among those whose work depends on weather, movement, and physical presence, leaving little buffer when routines are suddenly disrupted. Social identity shapes risk as well. Caste can determine where one lives. Gender can shape mobility and access to help. Age can decide who evacuates easily and who is left behind. Children and the elderly face quieter vulnerabilities. One needs care and continuity. The other needs support and mobility. Disasters strain both, often without drawing attention. Commissions studying past crises return to the same insight. Disasters magnify what already exists. They do not create inequality, but they make it harder to ignore. So vulnerability is not accidental. It is produced slowly, through everyday arrangements, becoming visible only when hazards arrive and the uneven weight of loss finally shows. Cities promise opportunity. They gather work, education, and hope into dense spaces. But they also gather risk, layering people, infrastructure, and expectations tightly together, where small failures can ripple outward. Urbanization changes how hazards behave. Rain that once soaked into soil now runs across concrete. Heat lingers between buildings. Drainage works harder, roads carry more weight, and margins for error quietly shrink. Flooding in cities is rarely about rain alone. Blocked drains, paved surfaces, narrowed waterways. Urban studies often note how everyday design decisions shape where water settles and who gets surrounded by it. Informal settlements feel this first. Built close to work, transport, and services, they often stand on land others avoided. Their location solves daily survival, while quietly absorbing higher risks. Heat stress tells a similar story. Dense housing, limited shade, long commutes, and outdoor work combine. Disaster assessments describe heat not as a sudden event, but as accumulated strain on bodies and routines. Infrastructure carries invisible pressure. Water lines, electricity, transport, waste systems are designed for balance. When populations surge faster than systems adapt, disruption becomes more likely, not dramatic, but persistent. Urban vulnerability is uneven. Air-conditioned offices and shaded streets coexist with tin roofs and open pavements. The city contains many climates, many levels of protection, side by side. Studies of urban disasters often sound calm. They speak of capacity, access, maintenance, and planning. Yet beneath the measured language is a simple observation. Cities amplify both resilience and fragility. So urban risk grows quietly, not through sudden collapse, but through daily pressures accumulating until a familiar hazard meets a city stretched just a little too thin. Rural landscapes carry a different rhythm of risk. Life moves with seasons, rainfall, soil, and water. When these patterns shift, disruption travels directly into livelihoods, not as interruption, but as erosion. Agriculture depends on timing. Sowing, irrigation, harvest, all rest on expectations shaped over years. Drought breaks this rhythm slowly, while floods undo it suddenly, leaving little space to adjust. Water sits at the center. Too little, and crops fail quietly. Too much, and fields disappear beneath silt and debris. In both cases, the loss unfolds beyond the moment itself. Climate variability deepens uncertainty. Rains arrive early or late. Heat stretches longer. Cold snaps surprise. Each deviation adds stress to decisions already made with narrow margins. Farmer distress is often discussed after disasters, but it builds beforehand through debt, unstable yields, and dependence on weather that feels increasingly unpredictable. Hazards simply bring this tension into view. Floods can erase more than crops. They wash away seeds, tools, and soil quality, turning recovery into a multi-season process rather than a single return to normal. Droughts push different choices. Livestock is sold. Consumption is cut. Education is paused. These are quiet adjustments, rarely counted as disaster impacts, yet deeply consequential. Migration often follows. When land cannot sustain income, people move, temporarily or permanently, reshaping villages and cities alike, carrying the echo of rural loss into urban spaces. So rural disasters linger. They stretch across seasons, decisions, and generations, turning natural variability into long-term livelihood uncertainty rather than a single dramatic event. Preparedness is often imagined as emergency response, but it begins much earlier, in everyday choices about space, safety, and how seriously future risks are taken, while life still feels normal. Planning is one such choice. Where homes are built, where roads run, where water is allowed to flow, these decisions quietly shape whether a hazard passes through or settles in. Land use tells a long story. Settling floodplains, cutting slopes, filling wetlands may solve immediate needs, but expert voices often note how these shortcuts return later as amplified loss. Building practices matter in ordinary ways. A stronger foundation, better materials, simple design adjustments, recommendations repeated across studies can turn shaking into fear rather than collapse. Preparedness is also about awareness. Knowing local risks, recognizing warning signs, understanding simple protective actions. Not specialized knowledge, just familiarity built into daily life. Many policy frameworks speak gently here. They emphasize reducing risk before disaster arrives, rather than only managing damage afterward, a shift from reaction to anticipation. Experts often return to the same point. Preparedness is cumulative. Small improvements, repeated widely, matter more than dramatic measures applied too late or too narrowly. This form governance is quiet. It rarely announces itself during calm times, yet it shapes outcomes decisively when hazards finally test everyday arrangements. Preparedness, then, is not fear-driven. It is a way of taking responsibility for the future, embedding care, foresight, and restraint into how society chooses to build and live. Disaster management does not rest with one actor. It unfolds across layers where national direction, state-level adaptation, and local action meet, sometimes smoothly, sometimes with visible strain. At the national level, there is perspective. Patterns across regions, shared resources, and long-term priorities come into view, offering a wider frame for understanding recurring risks. States work closer to the ground. They translate broad direction into regional context, adjusting for terrain, climate, population, and history, carrying both responsibility and constraint. Local bodies stand closest to impact. They know streets, villages, people, and routines. When hazards arrive, it is often local capacity that shapes the first hours and days. Disaster management authorities exist across these levels. Their role is less about command, more about connection, aligning information, resources, and response so efforts do not move in isolation. Reports often note the same challenge. Coordination matters as much as capacity. Equipment, plans, and expertise lose value if they do not reach the right place in time. Communication becomes critical here. Clear signals, shared understanding, and trust between levels can reduce confusion when decisions must be made quickly, under pressure. Capacity is uneven. Some regions have experience and systems built through repetition. Others are still learning, adapting after each event rather than ahead of it. So institutions matter not as structures alone. They matter as relationships between levels, departments, and people, tested most sharply when hazards demand collective action. Early warning is about time. A few extra hours, sometimes minutes, can change decisions, whether people move, protect belongings, or prepare mentally for what is coming. Forecasting turns uncertainty into signals. Not certainty, but guidance. It helps communities shift from surprise to anticipation, from reacting blindly to acting with some sense of direction. Alerts are only as useful as their reach. Messages must travel across phones, radios, sirens, and word of mouth, crossing language, literacy, and access without assuming everyone receives information the same way. Communication systems shape trust. When warnings are clear and consistent, people learn to listen. When they are confusing or late, even accurate forecasts can be ignored the next time. Technology has changed this landscape. Satellites, sensors, and models quietly watch oceans, skies, and land, translating distant changes into local warnings long before danger is visible. But technology does not act alone. Community response completes the chain. Knowing what to do, where to go, and whom to help turns information into protection. Access makes the difference. When early warnings reach everyone, rich or poor, urban or rural, loss reduces unevenly. When access is partial, vulnerability concentrates. Many assessments point to this gap. The problem is rarely absence of data, but uneven distribution of understanding, connectivity, and ability to respond in time. So, technology reduces loss most effectively when it is shared widely, trusted locally, and paired with simple actions people can take without hesitation. Response begins when plans meet reality. Evacuations, sheltering, rescue all unfold under pressure, shaped by weather, terrain, timing, and the willingness of people to move quickly. Evacuation is not just movement. It is persuasion, trust, and logistics combined. Some leave early, Others hesitate, tied to homes, animals, or livelihoods they cannot easily abandon. Relief camps become temporary worlds. They offer safety, food, and rest, but also crowding, waiting, and uncertainty. Life continues there, compressed into shared spaces. Health services carry immediate weight. Injuries, infections, chronic conditions, mental stress. Care must arrive fast, even as facilities themselves may be affected by the disaster. Logistics holds everything together. Food, water, medicines, fuel, equipment, moving them across damaged roads and disrupted systems tests coordination more than intention. Large-scale responses show both strength and strain. Experience helps. Familiar routines reduce confusion. Yet scale introduces complexity where small gaps can ripple into larger delays. Volunteers often fill spaces in between. They bridge official systems and community needs, translating plans into action, sometimes improvising when formal channels move slowly. Information remains fluid. Needs change daily. What was urgent yesterday may shift today, requiring constant adjustment rather than fixed solutions. Response, then, is never perfect or complete. It is a continuous process of alignment between people, resources, and time, under conditions that rarely allow ideal coordination. Recovery begins after the noise fades. When cameras leave and alerts fall silent, people return to broken walls, altered land, and the slow work of making life feel ordinary again. Rebuilding homes is the visible part. Bricks, timber, roofs, doors. Yet each structure carries invisible questions about safety, location, and whether returning truly. Livelihoods take longer to restore. Fields need seasons, shops need customers, routines need stability. Income does not return all at once. It arrives unevenly, testing patience and resilience. Trust is rebuilt quietly. Trust in buildings, in warnings, in neighbors, in systems meant to protect. It grows slowly, shaped by what worked, what failed, and what was learned. Recovery is rarely linear. Progress mixes with setbacks. One step forward, two sideways. The future feels possible, then fragile again, depending on weather, markets, or memory. Communities remember disasters long after headlines fade. They remember through altered routes, cautious habits, shared stories, and anniversaries that pass without ceremony, but not without feeling. Children carry memories differently. Some remember fear. Others remember disruption. These impressions shape how risk is understood long after physical damage is repaired. Reconstruction often aims to restore normalcy, but memory resists erasure. It asks whether normal was safe, fair, or sustainable in the first place. So recovery is not just rebuilding. It is living with memory, allowing experience to inform choices, quietly shaping how the future is imagined and prepared for. Learning after disaster is often uneven. Some lessons are absorbed quickly, others fade with time. What remains depends on memory, repetition, and whether daily pressures allow reflection at all. Building practices sometimes shift quietly. Materials change. Heights adjust. Layouts are reconsidered. These are not dramatic transformations, but small recalibrations shaped by experience rather than theory. Livelihoods adapt as well. People diversify income, alter crops, change timing, or migrate seasonally. These choices are rarely framed as resilience, yet they reflect lived adjustment to risk. Planning evolves through accumulation. Maps are redrawn. Assumptions are questioned. Past events linger in discussions, even when they are not named directly. Climate adaptation enters this space gently. Not as a single response, but as an awareness that patterns are less stable and that yesterday's expectations may not guide tomorrow's decisions. Risk reduction often happens indirectly, through habits, caution, and local knowledge passed on quietly, rather than through formal declarations or visible milestones. Resilience, then, is not a fixed quality. It is relational, shaped by resources, trust, and the ability to adjust without exhausting those already carrying the most strain. Some adaptations succeed. Others introduce new vulnerabilities. Learning is rarely clean. It moves forward while carrying traces of past arrangements. So societies adjust without finality. They learn, forget, relearn, circling risk rather than escaping it, living with uncertainty rather than resolving it once and for all. Disasters often feel sudden. But when we listen closely, they speak of choices made long before, where we built, what we ignored, what we postponed because the risk felt distant. Hazards arrive without intention. They follow nature's rhythms. Loss, however, follows human arrangements, settling into the spaces shaped by habit, pressure, and unequal room to prepare. Responsibility here is not about blame. It is about recognition, seeing how everyday decisions quietly accumulate into safety for some, exposure for others. Preparedness, then, is not only technical. It is cultural. It reflects what a society chooses to protect, whom it listens to, and how seriously it treats warnings before they feel urgent. Shared risk connects us unevenly. Some carry it daily. Others encounter it only when systems fail. Disasters briefly level attention, even if they never level impact. To see disasters this way is unsettling. It removes comfort from the idea of inevitability and replaces it with the quieter weight of responsibility spread across time. Yet it also opens space. Space to notice, to adjust, to care earlier rather than later, before hazards turn familiar vulnerabilities into irreversible loss. So, as this episode fades, we sit with the thought that disasters are not just events we endure, but mirrors, reflecting how we have chosen to live together. And for a moment, we let that reflection remain unanswered, hurried.